Hello, I'm Morag, and this is the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast from the Permaculture Education Institute. I invite you to join me in conversation each week with leading permaculture-related educators, thinkers, activists, authors, designers, artists, and practitioners to explore the kind of thinking and action we need to navigate a positive and regenerative way forward, to myceliate possibilities and to share ideas of what a thriving one planet way of life could look like. My guests offer voices of clarity and common sense. In this episode, I'm joined by Fleur Chambers. Fleur is a multi-award winning meditation teacher, philanthropist, and best-selling author of 10 Pathways, a framework for redefining happiness, Wholehearted Confidence, a new way to live, love, and contribute, and North Star Habits. Her guided meditations, courses, and free meditation app, The Happy Habit, have reached millions worldwide. And as a social entrepreneur, she shares 50% of her profits and has so far helped more than 60,000 people in Bangladesh access permanent clean drinking water. Before I head to my conversation with Fleur, I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here on beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country, surrounded by my permaculture forage gardens in a permaculture eco-village. As I said, this podcast is a project of the Permaculture Education Institute. We work with people on 6 continents, teaching permaculture design and teaching skills and how to be a good permaculture leader and create a regenerative permaculture livelihood, finding appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share wherever you are. I invite you to join me there. To find out more about our courses and programs, visit permacultureeducationinstitute.org/courses. You can start anytime, and I welcome you to book a call with me to ask anything you'd like about our education programs. Check the show notes below. And I'd also like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast app and to share it freely and leave us a 5-star review and lovely comment, because it really does actually help people to find this podcast. All right, well, let's now turn to my conversation with the wonderful Fleur Chambers about showing up each day, living and working in ways that align with our values and love of life. Thank you so much for joining me, Fleur. It's an absolute delight to have you on Sense Making in a Changing World show. Your books and your app are absolutely beautiful, and the work that you do in your business too. So I'm really excited to dive in with you into this world of yours. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this chat too, and so happy to be here.
The first thing that I wanted to touch on with you is your mission to change how we see happiness, health, and well-being. And perhaps we could begin there. It's like, what does happiness mean for you? Like, at the core of this work that you do, what does it mean for you, and how did you come to be paying attention to this as the core part of your work?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because I think I'm actually moving away from the word happiness. Isn't it funny how things have their season? Because in this current climate, who really wants to be happy? Like, don't we want to be brave, well, honest, courageous? I feel like maybe we've moved on from happiness. So I guess what I think deep well-being and an awakened life probably is this ability to say yes to it all, to say yes to the joys, to say yes to the challenges without clinging on or resisting. And so I think rather than happiness, for me, it would be like, what is an awakened life? And an awakened life is being able to hold my awareness so broad that there's actually room for everything. And why I think that's so relevant and meaningful now is there are so many contradictions. We have these deep desires to contribute to the world, but we're also tired. There's so much information, but we also want to tap into our own inner wisdom. So there's so many contradictions that we are balancing in our two tender hands. And I guess the joy of the small moments with our own families, of building our own gardens and seeing some change, held with the, global atrocities that are going on. So I think that happiness or an awakened life is about saying yes to it all and expanding our awareness so broad that there's space for it all.
That's beautiful. And it really touches on this thing of like, what are we here doing? What do we wake up to show up for every day? What are we in service of? What brings us that deep sense of meaning and purpose and sense of, fulfillment? Yes, I'm here being present in the fullness of my capacity. And I think, that the happiness word is a challenging one. I also do really love it at the same time, but when you wrap it around with that broader context, I think it brings it to life, whereas we can just be chasing happy and in a kind of hedonistic way and lose that meaning. But in terms of then health and well-being, meditation is a big part of what you're doing. And I was reading, you're saying that you see meditation as a tool for social change and ecological awareness. I mean, perhaps could you expand on that a bit? Because I see often, meditation being something that's very personal practice that we do. But in that description of talking about it being for social change and ecological restoration or awareness, yeah, I'd love to hear your perceptions on that.
Yeah, well, I think as an entry point, many people begin meditation to alleviate some form of suffering, can't get to sleep, can't relax, I'm stressed, I'm grumpy, reactionary. But the more they sit with the practice and they realize it's not actually about changing themselves, it's about connecting to a deeper sense of wisdom and ultimately this idea of shared humanity, that we all have a beating heart, we all desire to feel seen and heard and witnessed and to live a purposeful life. So when we move beyond meditation to alleviate an inconvenience in our lives and drop deeper into this sense of connection, that's when we can identify our purpose more clearly. That's when we can feel more compassionate to people who are different to us. That's when we can connect with nature and the seasons, the energy of planet Earth. And the more we can tap into that deep wisdom within, the more it inspires change. And so I guess there's two elements to this meditation as a tool for social and environmental change. And one is supporting people who meditate with me to access that deeper wisdom and awareness within that encourages this calibrated desire to contribute. And then the second arm of it is the specifics of my business, that I run my business as a social enterprise. And so if anybody downloads the app or buys a book, then 4 people get access to a lifetime's clean drinking water. So my business is set up as a tool for social and environmental change.
Mm. And thank you for bringing us to that point, because I'd really love to talk with you more about this, running our businesses as opportunities for contributing to something larger than ourselves and larger than our own businesses. It's something that we do here at the Permaculture Education Institute as well, and supporting people across the world. And firstly, I wanted to ask you, how did you come to the point of wanting to set your business up as a social enterprise, and how did you then begin to select the kind of projects that you want to support? Or did you start it with the idea that you wanted to support these projects? That, just that description of how that happened.
It's a really good question. And I hope for anybody listening that they can sort of understand that it's a journey, and it's a journey of personal development and discovery and stepping into your own higher expression, really, I think. So I'll start by saying that I was born with the giving gene. That's just how I was ever since I was little. When I was young and I used to hear an ambulance, I'd stop and say a little prayer for the person and their families. I've always had a deep desire to take care of animals. At our wedding, instead of giving gifts to the guests, we planted a tree for everyone. So this value of shared humanity and contribution has always been a part of who I was. So then the biggest block for me, as I got curious about how I could be more outward and intentional about this, was really I was afraid that people were going to judge me. The judgments I was afraid they would make was, one, that they would think I was only giving back because I didn't need the money to work, that I was in a position of privilege and I could do that. And then I was worried that I would annoy people who just wanted to meditate and didn't want to think about the broader social and environmental context. So they were actually two shadow aspects of myself, this fear of being judged, that I had to really sit with in order to step into a bigger, bolder version of myself. And so I began with a Mindfulness for Mums session on Mother's Day that I ran as a philanthropic event to give money to mothers in Africa. And when I was guiding the meditation, there was an energy, something quite profound shifted in the room. It was more powerful, weaving this connection to people around the world. It just elevated the meditation practice. And when we debriefed afterwards, everyone felt it. It wasn't just me. People were able to connect more deeply with their heart. They were able to offer themselves compassion, these women in Africa compassion. And it was just like this perfect example for me that it worked for the right people. When you allow people to expand their awareness, to connect with their heart and this sense of connection with other people, not only does their meditation practice get better, but their lives get better too. And so that was like a good example for me. Yes, I can do this. And so then I started getting creative and working out how I could support projects that related to the courses I was running. And that was really fun and creative, and I love that part of it. So I had a course on morning meditations, and I found a project in Africa which provided malaria nets for children with disabilities. And I picked up on this theme so they could start their days with a sense of optimism and hope, knowing that, they hadn't caught malaria overnight. And so I began to learn how to weave the projects into the courses as a way of expanding the experience for everyone. And I did come up against some resistance. My favourite, most memorable comment was an angry man that told me he wasn't interested in my political, social, economic views. He just wanted to meditate. And the best thing about that was my greatest fear, that people would tell me they didn't want to think about others whilst meditating. And this guy said that, and you know what? Oh, well, he can find someone else. So that was a really great experience, when your fear comes to reality and you're like, actually, that wasn't so bad after all.
I think it's interesting too, because it's like you say, there's so many different places that you can pick up meditation if you really want to connect deeply with yourself and the planet at the same time. Then you're the person to come and spend time with. And I think that's being clear about that, I think, is probably one of the most powerful things, and not apologizing for being clear about that as well. I think that helps. Yeah. So I'm really interested to find out more about your relationship with these projects. So how much of your business do you send across to projects overseas, and how did you determine that kind of balance that you've got, and is that working, and how did you pick the projects that you support as well? I mean, you said you found that project, but how and where, which country is it in, and do you have a connection with them as well? So lots of little questions all bundled together there.
And they're great questions. So first of all, I decided for my business, I wanted to call myself a social enterprise. And in order to do that, you have to redistribute 50% of profits. That's one way to call yourself a social enterprise. And so that's what I do. So interestingly, one of the first women that came to one of my Mindfulness for Mothers courses owns a really progressive charity that is trying to reimagine the relationship between donor and project leader. So you know that historically there's been this really uncomfortable sort of white people come in and tell developing countries how to run their projects. So this really goes against that, and it develops an empowerment model between donor and project leader that actually gives the project leader a lot more power and a lot more autonomy and a lot more respect that they're on the ground and that they actually know what their communities need. So that is very, very appealing. So the main organisation who I work with is called Just Peoples, and they develop all the relationships with the project leaders. So they do all of that work. And then what I do is I find the projects within there. So that's how I found the Malaria Nets project. That's how I found the Safe Cook Stoves, the counselling for women fleeing domestic violence in Vietnam. And I trust that all of those project leaders have been vetted and are the real deal. So that's a level of safety that I have through the relationship that I've formed. What then happened was I wanted to move into the next level of transparency, and I wanted to commit to one project so people could come along for the ride. And I decided on water because whilst I was okay with some people not feeling comfortable with me weaving the philanthropic stuff into the meditations, I thought there are some topics that are harder for everyone to swallow, like period poverty and things like that. So I did decide to tackle an area that most people could relate to, and it wouldn't make people feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. So water is something that we all need. The flow-on effect of not having clean drinking water for women, for children, for education, for poverty. So it's an easy one for people to relate to and feel good about. I also wanted it to have an environmental feel to it. So I found a project. It's called Footsteps, and it's in Bangladesh, and it's run by a man called Shah, who is an insane scientist and environmentalist. So in Bangladesh, they have enough water, but it's contaminated. So what they do is they go into schools and they build bespoke water systems that will last a lifetime. But not only do they build these special systems, but they also educate the staff and the community about how to keep them up and running. So there's that element of empowerment as well there. So it's in line with what I teach, which is about empowering yourself to make good decisions in your own life. And then we do the same, we follow the same blueprint when we give, as in we don't give through I know more than you do, listen to me, teach a student way. We give to empower other people to make the most of their lives.
I think it's amazing, and wouldn't it be wonderful if there were so many more social enterprises? And I love the fact that you really stepped up the mark there. Like this, 50% of profits. That's not a sneeze. I often look at the 1% for the planet or something. I think that's not enough. As business leaders, we need to actually step up and really put our heart on the table and put our money on the table simultaneously. Meditation's at the heart of your business, as I understand. Meditation with your app and with your writing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be so in love with meditation as the core part of what you're doing. Like, what is meditation to you, and how would you describe the process of meditation too?
I began meditating when my three kids were really little, and I was just so distracted. I was constantly replaying conversations and being so hard on myself, wishing things had turned out differently, or I was just off in the future, planning, micromanaging, and all of that distraction sort of held this energy of unkindness and fear. And it was really starting to filter out into all areas of my life. And it was actually my mum, who is a long-time meditator, who must have just seen a crack, an opening, you know, like mothers do. And she's like, Dal, you really need to start meditating, not only for yourself, but for those three beautiful kids. And so I did, and immediately I felt a difference. It was like getting into my sensate world, feeling the touch of my children's hands in mine, noticing the change in seasons, the light as it came through the window. There was just this immediate sense of peace and of coming home. And so I just stuck with the practice and I kept on chipping away. And now it is really something that is a huge part of my life. It's rather than a formal practice, it's a way of being with myself that is compassionate, kind, has a bit of a sense of humor, it's expansive. And when I get to meet that version of myself in meditation, it just spills out into my everyday life. So I take a breath before I say something. I'm less judgmental of others. I trust that things will pass. I have a deep connection to nature, to awe and wonder. And I guess the main thing is I just have a reverence for life. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And I had a beautiful moment the other day where I received some news that wasn't great. And my immediate response was not to react and wish it wasn't there. I just welcomed it. And I was like, wow, this has taken a few years, but this is where I am. So when the bad news comes, there's like a surrendering into it rather than a resistance, and a knowing, one, that it will pass, and two, that I can experience a sense of well-being even within the bad news.
You know, it's interesting, you know, as you're talking, that the awe and wonder in nature and feeling deeply connected, and that movement and flow of life. You know, it's something that I found the garden has taught me, you know, as being deeply out. And so having a practice where you pay attention and you slow down enough to be present in that moment. And I find actually having a practice like that does make an enormous difference. And it's a big part of the resilience piece. You know, we talk a lot about resilience. We need to be focusing on resilience in the ecological world, in society, but in our own self as well. Having this practice is essential, I think, to be able to hold what's coming and be able to sit with that, and to be present is so important.
And I think you raise a very important point here about find the thing that works for you, especially when you're just starting out. So you don't need to sit with a straight spine and battle your busy mind and think that meditation is a certain thing that you can either be good or bad at. If you find that you can drop into your sensate world and the present moment with greater awe and wonder and acceptance and ease and curiosity in the garden, whilst cooking, whilst dancing, whilst on a boat, whilst swimming, then start there. You know, start at an entry point that feels delightful, easy, curious, and then you might just notice that you can move away from that particular one and take those feelings of openness, of awe and wonder into other areas of your life. It doesn't, and I think whilst meditation is the absolute bread and butter of my business, I think I am moving towards a greater understanding that people can do it in different ways.
Yeah. Walking meditation. Sitting by the river with your feet dangling in, the water rushing past. Yeah, there's so many different ways. So can you tell us a bit more about the Happy app? I mean, this is your meditation app. I mean, how do you guide people through this app to enter into this space of being meditators?
Of course. So the Happy Habit app, I developed this framework for inner happiness. So it's called 10 pathways. So you can imagine the pathways as neurological pathways that you cultivate through mindfulness and meditation. You can imagine them as pathways of putting one foot in front of the other in your everyday life. You can imagine them as a journey that you go on. And so the pathways are things like calm, compassion, awareness, gratitude, vitality, confidence, perspective. And so the idea is that I wanted to move away from a teacher having the answers for you and people getting addicted to a certain meditation. So the idea is that you check in with yourself in the morning and go, okay, what could I do with a dose of this morning? I've been feeling a bit irritable with the kids. Maybe I could do with a dose of gratitude. Or I've really been ruminating over this problem. I just can't work it out. Maybe I could do with a dose of perspective. And so you develop a skill of working out what you need to feel more open-hearted in that moment. And so then you would explore one of those pathways, and you could explore a meditation, you could explore a course, you could just do a 5-minute meditation. So I guess that's there for people. And then the other features on the app, there's journaling, there's sleep meditations, there's meditations for people with ADHD, and there is music, just beautiful music to guide people when they're walking, when they're cooking, before they go to bed.
So you just mentioned there with ADHD. So have you been getting feedback from people about how they're responding to that, like parents with children, or what kind of response are you hearing?
Well, and it's interesting because I was just having a chat with a neurodiverse community. I think so many of us have these expectations about what meditation should be, that we should calm our mind, that we should sit still, that it needs to be done in a certain way. And I think whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, those rigid understandings of meditation don't help, because the truth is our minds are designed to think. Whether you have ADHD, whether you're autistic, whether you're neurotypical, our minds will think. We also live in a world that is always vying for our attention. So really, doesn't matter who you are and where you sit on any neurodivergent spectrum, the act of sitting and being with yourself is an act of rebellion, and it will feel hard. So first of all, we need to normalize the fact that it's hard for all of us. It may be especially hard for people with ADHD. They haven't done any specific research, brain scans, so we don't know. But I think that the meditations I've created there, first of all, they deal with some of the specifics around challenges for ADHD, like rejection sensitivity, cooling down the busy mind, cultivating body awareness, letting go of expectations that you need to sit still, and all of that sort of stuff. And people are really enjoying them. There's also meditations to harness your creativity. But I think at the end of the day, if you're a human living in a Western patriarchal world, there's going to be a level of uncomfortability when you sit in meditation. And I think that we need to see it as an act of rebellion.
I really love that. You're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of things we need to be in acts of rebellion about at the moment, and being far more audacious with how we're stepping into things. And So you've got 3 books. Firstly, like you're a mum, you run a business. How do you actually even get a time to write a book, firstly? And are those beautiful illustrations in there? Where did they come from? They're extraordinary.
Thank you. Yes, 3 books in 3 years.
How did you do that?
Oh, my husband likes to say, don't you ever run out of things to say. Not yet. So there was a journey with those 3 books, a beautiful journey. So the first book I really wrote, it was about my experience with chronic pain and how you could live well with disappointment and challenges. That was really where that framework for redefining happiness came from. And I just wanted a book that energetically felt beautiful. I wanted a book with illustrations. I wanted a book where if it even just sat on your bedside table and you just flicked through and looked at a picture, you'd feel good. We don't have enough beautiful adult self-help books out there. So I worked with a local Australian watercolor illustrator who again had been part of my Mindfulness for Mums community. So it was such a beautiful process because some of the illustrations she made especially for the book, and then some of the illustrations we looked through her archive. So I would say things like, have you got a picture of a boy on a bike going through the botanical gardens? And she'd be like, yep, got one of them. Have you got a picture of a beautiful gum tree outside an old Edwardian house? Yep, got one of them because we were living in the same community and she had kids the same age as me. So she just had an illustration for so many of the things. But there's something incredibly creative that I really, really like about illustrating a book. And so the second book, Wholehearted Confidence, was a totally different experience in that I engaged an American illustrator and I had to work with her around energy. So I would give her a brief of like, I want an illustration that feels dark and stormy, but has a sense of hope. So it was very energetic, and she would then come back. And the whole book moves through a color palette. So it's an emotional journey, it's an energetic journey, and it's a personal journey into confidence. And so then the bit that's really exciting is like, how do you marry up the illustrations to meet the words and the practices? And then when I did my third book, I didn't do any illustrations, and I'll tell you what, it was much easier. I didn't realize how much that design of the book, how much time and energy that really took.
Yeah, yeah. They are beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. I wanted to talk about the confidence piece. Like I teach permaculture teachers, and one of the biggest things that people come back to me is that it's like, oh, but I don't feel like I have the confidence yet to go out and speak. Like I feel like I know it, but I don't have the confidence to share it. So this confidence piece, like where does that sit with you? And like what kind of guidance do you give people within this book about stepping into that confidence?
It's such a familiar story, that one you talk about, bright, educated, skilled, amazing people that feel like they're not the real deal yet. So one of the pathways in my framework is confidence. And it's funny because it took me a while to realize that you could meditate to improve your confidence. I always thought it was more like gratitude, calm, but actually you can meditate to level up energetically, if that sort of makes sense. So I created this framework that really was a rejection of this male patriarchal model of confidence, firm handshake, wide leg stance, tell people what you think, speak more than you listen, don't have any insecurities. And I was like, hang on, the world doesn't need any more of that. How can we reframe what confidence is so that more people feel confident? And so I created this 4-part framework. And the first part was really acknowledging your childhood. So the big and little t traumas, the conditioning, all the little stories that people have told you that might impact how you feel about yourself, that you're shy, not as clever as your brother or sister, that you're too much, too little, all of this sort of stuff. And then I also invited people to get really curious about what brought them delight as a child and to have the courage to bring a bit more of that into their everyday lives. So that was the first step. The second step was this piece that you're talking about of knowing that actually we can feel confident even with a little bit of imposter syndrome, even with a little bit of self-doubt, even with a little bit of fear that other people are going to judge you. You go ahead and you do it anyway. Confidence isn't about eradicating our vulnerabilities. It's about being with them with such tenderness that they can actually be like our partners, our teachers. And as I say this, I'm thinking of these people teaching permaculture, and it's like, what would it be like just to allow that vulnerability, just to have a place at the table in the garden, to get their fingers dirty in the ground and just to be with you there? They don't need to go anywhere. They can be there and you can be confident with them. And there's a tenderness and an exquisiteness with cultivating your capacity to be with your own vulnerabilities, because then it allows you to be with other people's and the planet's. And this is the work that you're doing. And so then the third and fourth part of the confidence framework is opening the lines of communication. So connecting to the wisdom of your body, your heart, and the natural world. And then really acknowledging the impermanent nature of life.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I hope everyone who's listening, who's had that thought, will maybe rewind and have a listen through to that again. And your third book, North Star Habits, is a compilation of different authors, I understand. So how did that piece of work come about, and what's at the heart of that for you?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And it really was a journey, because when I wrote my first book, I was like, oh, it's a lot of uncomfortability here. I'm worried about being seen, being judged. And I was like, okay, I got through that. I won't feel that the second time around. Went to write the second book. Joke's on me. There it is again. So I realized that there's a level of uncomfortability that comes with sharing yourself more deeply. It didn't disappear after writing one book. It was still there. But what changed was my response to it. I was prepared for it. I didn't try and push it away. I didn't make it mean anything. I allowed it to be there. And I also realized through writing both books how healing, working through that and sharing your story and being seen in your fullness really can be. So I decided to support other people to have this experience. And there are a lot of anthologies out there, but there's no anthologies that really support people to go through this writer's journey. And so I created this opportunity where not only would people learn to write their story in a way that was engaging and being of service to others, but they would also learn to be with the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, the fear of not being enough. And that's really what I did. And there's 17 authors from around the world. Everyone had their moment of vulnerability. Even the people who didn't, I'm like, wow, when's their moment coming? And then it did. So there is no escaping a level of tenderness that comes when you want to step into a bigger, more bold and beautiful expression of yourself. And I guess how that relates to the work that you do is just normalizing that, I guess, that as people are really trying to make an impact, as people are sharing their hearts, what they deeply believe in about their own communities and the world, there's there's a real tenderness that goes with that. You can feel very strongly about something, but there's tenderness that comes with that.
I'm really fascinated by the process that you use to create this recent book, this collections anthology. And I think there's a lot of place that could happen, because this everyone has stories, but someone has to hold the story collection and that process. So were you leading that process of gathering all these stories? How did you find the people, and who did it take, like a series of workshops, or did you, like, how did that happen?
It was a very cool process. So I set the intention for the topic of the book to be habits, ordinary habits that have had an extraordinary impact. And when I sent out the invitation for people, I didn't know what type of habits I was going to get. I think I was hoping for really remarkable habits, like people that had swum to Tasmania or whatever. And I actually didn't get that. I got really beautiful, simple habits that had made quite a profound impact on people's lives. So there were 17 people. Some people paid to be in the experience because it was like a 6-month coaching experience and then the book. Some people I gave the spots for free, and some people I supported through the project leaders. I put 4 project leaders in because I just wanted to make sure that we elevated their voices and we had some diverse stories and experiences and backgrounds. So we went through a 4-month experience where we basically deconstructed what it is to be a good writer, what it is to be creative, how you tell a story that allows other people to see themselves, how you move from the ego and realize it's not about big, bold plots and twists. It's actually learning to be aware of your own nuances, the internal contradictions, the shared humanity, and how to have a confidence to write a story that really enables other people to see themselves. So there was a lot of drawing in of themes. And then I worked with people around what's not being said, because it's very interesting. People came with their first drafts and I knew a lot of them. I'd been teaching them meditation for years and I was like, that's not the real story. So there was a lot of coaching and supporting people to go on their own journey to be seen in a very new way. And some of the stories that people shared, they'd never shared publicly before. So, of course, it was going to take a little while. And then we worked with 2 professional editors. So everybody had a big story edit around themes and what's the real story. And then we had like the copy edit and all of that. And then I really brought it together with a beautiful introduction and an epilogue. And what I realized was that all the stories had this element of self-compassion, kindness, awareness, and that really we're more the same than we are different.
How beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Are you going to do that again? Is that something that you like, this 6-month coaching of writing? I mean, is that now something you go, right, well, I'm going to keep doing that because that was good?
Yeah, I really liked it. I do have an idea for my next one, which is untold love stories.
Oh.
So this idea that we have this idea of what love should look and feel like, and so many people are getting divorced, are lonely, live on their own, have children who live far away, have health conditions, and that actually we need to expand what our definition of love is. So this idea would be when love caught you by surprise. Might be stories of people falling in love with a place, a pet, themselves after illness or injury, falling in love with a part of themselves they were always ashamed about. So yes, I'm just setting the intention for some of those people with some love stories to come forward, and I think I'll sort of do that mid-year.
Oh, I love that. And, there's the whole concept of radical love that Satish Kumar puts forward about, being able to, there's moderate love of, things that are easy to love, and then there's the love of, loving that which doesn't often come easily or is surprising as well. Wonderful. Oh, I'm super excited about that. That's yes, we need to uplift this in the world. More love and kindness and compassion, all the things that you're talking about. I mean, these are the very things that if we can be more tender and more caring and more present, these are the things that are transformative in the world. I mean, the kind of things that I guess through the world of permaculture, I'm attempting to do, to be more present, to tend to the garden, which is tending to the planet. It's a different practice, but the heart of it has that same core. So it's really beautiful to hear.
I guess there was one other thing I was thinking around trusting the ripple, I think. So often when we're really busy, and you've talked about permaculture and doing your thing in your community, I think what meditation does, it creates spaciousness so we can trust the ripple of our actions. And so with this book, and I think of markers of success and the ripple, people in this book have given it to their parents, their children. They've allowed themselves to be seen and heard in a different way. They've handed it to a friend who's having a tough time. They've learnt about a project leader across the other side of the world. So we can never understand the impact that our little bit is having. But if we trust the ripple and we allow enough time and space in our lives to observe the ripple, then our lives feel more meaningful and we feel like we're contributing more.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in terms of where you find time in everything to write, I mean, that's a very personal question for me, because I have lots of books that are hanging around me here. And every time I meet an author, I ask this question, because I do find it a challenging thing to actually sort of push away, that project, this project, and actually carve out some time to do that really hard work of the writing, that it takes time. How do you do that?
Well, I set myself the intention to write the book. So that becomes important to me. And I guess other things don't. So all the other projects I say no to because I'm writing a book this year. So I actually set myself the intention. And then I work like bottom up. So I just allow life to inspire me. So I carve out a couple of hours each day to write, and I would go for a walk and I let nature guide me. So I'll notice an owl, I'll notice the change in sunlight, I'll notice that leaf, and then I'll be with that for long enough that it forms like an ecosystem around it. And then there's my idea and I write that bit. You have to really just commit to writing the book. This year I'm going to write a book. Start telling some people.
Yes.
Don't be embarrassed.
Right, this year I'm starting writing a book. There you go. I've told everyone.
But also I think that just writing without the expectation of it being a book, those beautiful morning pages that you just do in the morning, and just getting in the habit of becoming a writer and writing. But I think that's what meditation really does help you with. It's like there's so many things we could be doing, so many ways we could be contributing, so many new projects, and you're probably at the level in your career where people approach you all the time, and everything's worthy. So meditation can help get that level of discernment around how much capacity, how much time, is this just a shiny new thing? Is this the ego? What will I have to let go? Just asking those really discerning questions.
Yeah, discernment, because you're absolutely right. There are so many things that we could be filling our days with. Everything seems important when we look to the planet, when we look to our communities, when we look to our families, there's everything is important and everything needs doing, and having the discernment. I love that word. Thank you for that, bringing that. That's my today word. The discernment to actually figure out which bits we need to be tending to and which bits perhaps can just be noted and let move past us. We don't need to do everything. We can't do everything.
Feeling into the uncomfortability within that, the disappointment, the shame, whatever comes up when you realize you can't do everything. And I love that podcast on slowness with that beautiful Japanese man. And I was just smiling as I was listening to that podcast, because you were really talking about urgency, but when everything's urgent, and there was this energy to your urgency, and just responding with so much slowness. And I was just watching the energetic exchange play out. It was just so awesome. But I feel like meditation and self-awareness helps you calibrate your actions and your intentions. So when am I operating from a baseline of scarcity, not enoughness, ego, urgency, and ultimately those actions, they're not sustainable? And how can I maybe do exactly the same thing, but from an underlying baseline of enoughness, slowness, trust, and discernment? So it's not so much about what you're doing, it's about the energy that sits underneath them.
So somewhere there must be someone doing permaculture meditations. Like, we don't have to bring things together like this, but often the permaculture world is about what's going on out there. It's okay. We have these permaculture zones, zone 1, which is the kitchen garden, then it goes out to the food forest, out to the world. And what goes on in the inner realm is just stuff that you have to get on with and do your own. But like bringing that into our conversations more directly, I think it's really important. A friend of mine, I was just hosting a conversation at the International Permaculture Conference, and she was talking about inner permaculture. So I'm going to pick up the thread with her, because I think that's possibly where we do need to take this, because it will help us to be present in the world with far more resilience and capability and tenderness, and hold the work that we do in a way. So I think, bringing meditation more closely aligned with permaculture is a really good thing. Thank you for bringing that in today. Where can people find your work, your app, your books, you?
So downloading the Happy Habit app from anywhere is a great place to start. There's loads of stuff you can do for free for as long as you like. No need to sign up or give your credit card or anything. And then if you did want to explore the entire library, which has hundreds upon hundreds of things, it's ridiculously reasonable. It's like $5 a month and $40 a year or something. So that's a great place to start. If the idea of embracing this new idea of wholehearted confidence appealed to you, and if you like the idea of a beautifully illustrated book, then that is what I would recommend, Wholehearted Confidence. That's my second book, and I think it's probably the most meaningful and relevant for these times.
Thank you. So I'm going to put all the links to these in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Fleur. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure to connect with you. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sense Making a Changing World, a podcast of the Permaculture Education Institute. Check out the show notes below to find the links to all of Fleur's website, books, and app, and visit permacultureeducationinstitute.org for details of all of our permaculture courses and resources. The links in the show notes below, and make sure you're signed up to our newsletter for weekly updates. And I welcome you to come and join us at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired, one planet way of life. Take care. See you next time.